All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode here on the Sunni Defense. Inshallah, today we're going to be doing something completely different than what you're used to. We're going to be going through a few arguments that have been brought up by Ishmael from Don't Convert to Islam. Today, alhamdulillah, with me I have Brother Abdullah Mu'taz, and he's, mashallah, quite well versed in this topic of qira'at and Quranic sciences. Abdullah?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi Farid. Thank you.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. First of all, I think it's very important to give our audience a basic idea of what is meant by al-ahruf al-sab'a, because there's this misconception going on about there's this misconception that there are no ahruf in the first place. It's just one harf. So would you mind giving our audience a brief idea about that?
Yeah, sure. So, as we know, the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and we can say that the Quran is divided into two parts. There's a part that never changes, or there's no variance in it. So, for example, if you're to read in Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, there's actually no variance in that. It's always Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, it's constant. Now, there's another part of the Quran where there is variant readings, and it is perhaps one of the better established facts about the Quran that variants exist and that the source of the variance is the Prophet ﷺ from Allah Azza wa Jal. And to give an example of that, we have in Fatiha as well, Maliki Yawmiddin. So if we look at Maliki Yawmiddin, this ayah, we see that Yawmiddin, this part of it, it's constant. There's no variance in it. Now the word Maliki, on the other hand, there is a variant reading for it. So some read it Maliki and some read it Maliki. And when obviously we say some read it, we're referring to the qurra who happen to read it that way. Otherwise, it all comes from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have good reason actually to believe that these variant readings come from the Prophet. For one, the Prophet talked about this in theory. There's many ahadith from many different Sahaba who report that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Unzil al-Quran ala sab'at ahruf." The Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf. And I don't want to get too much into ahruf, unless Farid you want to, but and the reason why is because there's a difference of opinion on the meaning of ahruf. However, even with all the difference of opinion that surrounds the meaning of ahruf, they all agree on the same concept, which is that there is a form of variance. So number one, the Prophet talked in theory about this variance occurring. He said, "Unzil al-Quran ala sab'at ahruf."
Okay,
Um,
now I just need to ask. I just need to ask, what is the purpose of Sab'at Ahruf? Why are there Sab'at Ahruf?
okay, so this is interesting. This is now becomes like more like a theological question dealing with the ahruf, the historicity of the ahruf, who they came from. Were they did they appear in the life of the Prophet? What is their source? This is a historical question and can be dealt with very easily historically. Now, the issue of why, what's the wisdom? This is a theological issue, and we could sit here until God knows when discussing why. But we can establish this historically. But I mean, to answer your question, I mean, there's books written on the topic. One of them is for ease when it comes to the lahajat of the Arab, the different dialects of the Arabs. The Arabs are of their varying dialects from various tribes. So one of the wisdoms or one of the benefits of having this ahruf was the ease of the Arabs in reciting the Quran. And then there's other ones. And I think you'll get to this in another episode when we look at the huruf al-ma'ani, where their variation exists to add, another, another meaning to the ayah. So the variant will exist, and through the variance, you come up with uh, several nice meanings, several important meanings that support each other, though the meanings do not contradict. So that's some of the benefits and wisdoms behind it. But then again, like I said before, we can talk about it, and we could even find more benefits and wisdoms. And like I said, there's books written on it. And inshallah, I think Farid, we're planning doing a second episode where we discuss specific individual examples of the variants, and then the role that they have in the meaning. Correct?
Sure, definitely. Now here's of course, I'm trying to get to the topic of the discussion more specifically. Um, what we have right here, the common masahif that are printed usually in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the Muslim world are usually, according to the recitation of Hafs and Asim. What is Hafs and Asim? What is this? So this is a qira'ah. Is a qira'ah a harf?
So no, qira'ah is not a harf. So a harf, by the way, here's an interesting point. The word harf can be used in two different contexts. Harf can be used to apply to the types of differences that exist, and this is the way that it appears the Prophet was using it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he talked about the hadith of the ahruf, right?
Mhm.
It can also refer to the individual, variations. So, qira'ah is not a harf. What a qira'ah is a combination of the variant readings in one khatma, in
Okay.
one recital of the Quran, if you will. So that's what a qira'ah is.
Okay. All right. Okay. So
Combination
so
variant readings. Mhm.
all right. So who is this Hafs exactly, and why is he so important?
Well, why is he important? That's a loaded question. He's important because the Ottoman Empire, his recitation or his recitation that became famous with his name was very widespread in the Ottoman Empire, and because of that, it became famous. Otherwise, it was not necessarily the most famous recital that was used. It's also the most easiest for people. Uh, like for example, the imalat.
Mm.
There's barely any in Hafs, and the different other variations. So it's the easiest probably for non-Arabs, I would say. And then you have like the social effect or socio-political reason of the Ottoman Empire. They popularized it.
Okay. So apart from that, the man Hafs. Do correct me if I'm wrong. He's a second century from
Mhm.
Kufa and a student of Asim. Asim himself took his recitation, if I'm not mistaken, from Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who took it from Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's the chain that's usually mentioned for his recitation, if I'm not mistaken. Apart from that, from my understanding, the qira'ah of Ali and the qira'ah of Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami were widespread among the people of the Kufa. Is that correct?
Yes, Asim is himself is considered to be his qira'ah, right, is considered to be famous. Imam Ahmad was known to have recited in it. Yes, and it was widespread in Kufa. It was recited by the people of Kufa. Mhm.
All right, great. So in regards to the reason we're making this video, it's because of it's mainly a response to Don't Convert to Islam's video. He made a video called 100% proof, I believe, 100% proof the Quran is false, something along those lines. And his main argument is that Hafs is weak and Hafs is a liar. So how can you accept the Quran if Hafs is weak and Hafs is a liar?
So this is actually an interesting point because in reality, what it does is shows how accurate and precise or fair that our scholars were. Because even though Hafs, without a doubt, is considered to be an extremely unreliable transmitter, he's very weak. He's an extremely unreliable transmitter in Hadith. He's not considered to be unreliable in his transmission of Quran. and he's actually like Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, Al-Dhahabi, Ibn Hajar, other Ibn al-Jazari, and others. I mean, all the Qurra, they consider him to be reliable and to be not only reliable but authority in qira'at. So the first thing is that to be unreliable or to have weakness in one field does not necessitate being incompetent or having weakness in another field. And the fields of hadith and the fields of qira'at are completely different fields. And just to give an example of this, if you notice what Ibn Hibban, how he criticizes Hafs when he gives what's called Jarh Mufassar. So he's criticizing him, and he explains his reasons for criticizing him. He
Hmm.
didn't just say he's weak or incompetent. He gave his reasons. One of those reasons that he gives, or the main reason he gives, is that he makes mursal ahadith as musnad. So you find
Mm.
a hadith
So
with
disconnected narration,
Mhm.
he'd connect it to the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah. So there'd be a disconnected chain of transmission, and he would transmit it directly from the Prophet with a connected chain of transmission. And this is
Okay.
obviously problematic because you take a hadith that would otherwise be considered weak, and then you transmit it with this connected chain, so people could now think it's actually connected if it was not for the weakness of Hafs. So if you see this, well, this is the
Was that
reasoning.
intentional though? That's an important question I got to ask. Was that intentional?
No, it wasn't. So
Okay.
and this is the interesting point here, that his weakness is in this type of transmission. He's not very familiar with asanid.
Mm.
This reason, his unfamiliarity with asanid, which caused him to be weak in hadith, is not applicable to qira'at. Hafs, he transmits from Asim, who narrates with one isnad to the Prophet, right?
Right.
Well, actually, multiple isnad, more than one
Sure.
isnad. But
Sure.
there's one real documented isnad from the Prophet,
Sure.
because I do not remember which one. Don't quote me on this, but he has two students. Asim has two students, Shu'ba and Hafs, and he told one of them, "I taught you what Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami taught me," and the other one he told him, I taught you what Zir ibn Hubaysh taught me."
Right.
So there's one isnad for this, and it's documented, very well documented, to the Prophet ﷺ. So whether or not he even knows this chain or has the chain memorized, if you will, or retained, it doesn't even matter because it's already documented. So his
Right.
problem is not in incorrectly, for example, transmitting mutun or texts. He doesn't add and remove from texts. His problem is his unfamiliarity with asanid. So
Hmm.
even though he's weak, and this is, for example, the reason that Ibn Hibban gives for him being weak, this weakness is not applicable to hadith.
I
Sorry, it's
see.
not applicable to qira'at.
Right.
And that's just one example of how the qira'at and hadith are different fields. So weakness in one field or incompetence in one field doesn't necessitate incompetence in the other.
All right. Let's get to the I guess more controversial bit. Now this is you've dealt with the issue of weakness, but what about this accusation of him being a liar?
Okay, so when it comes to the accusations of Hafs being a liar, there's two people who are known to have claimed this, and they use the word, kadhaba or yakdhib or stuff like this. One of them is Ibn Khirash, the other one is Yahya ibn Ma'in. The first one, Ibn Khirash, he's not really taken seriously by the scholars of hadith or hadith critics, for various reasons, but he's not really considered taken seriously. There's something well known in hadith criticism. He was an extreme Shi'i, and was extremely mutashaddid in his
Which is extreme or aggressive?
very aggressive. Yes, muta'annit. He's very aggressive in his characterizations of transmitters. Now, when it comes to Yahya ibn Ma'in, there are actually many different transmissions from Yahya ibn Ma'in on what he called Hafs. One of them mentions that he lied and used the word kadhib, right? Um, So there's two ways we can deal with this. One of them is simply that Yahya ibn Ma'in is mistaken. There's really no one else who agreed with him on this. That's possible. Another possible way, and I think this is important to consider, is that uh, the way that the muhaddithin, the early hadith critics, would use the word kadhib and batil, false, lie, fabrication, they would not only reserve it for people that purposefully fabricated a hadith or purposefully forged them. And this comes from their principle that al-khata' al-mutahaqqaq lahu hukm al-kadhib, that a verified mistake, a mistake that we can verify has occurred in the transmission, if we can confirm that an error was made in the transmission of a hadith, it is the same, or it has the same ruling as something that was purposefully fabricated from the Prophet. Hence, you find in the Ilal of Ibn Abi Hatim and other books of the early hadith critics, they're very lax, if you will, in their usage of kadhib. So sometimes you find a hadith where there's only someone who's saduq. He's a trustworthy transmitter, but not reliable, not thiqa. That it's something that this saduq has exclusively transmitted. And then Abu Hatim al-Razi, for example, will say kadhib. It's a lie. Or he'll say it's batil, it's false. Or mawdu', it's fabricated, or shibh al-mawdu', it's as though it's fabricated. So
Mm.
their usage of these words was not, relegated only for those who purposefully lied. And I think this is a good way to understand Yahya ibn Ma'in's statements or sentiments about uh, Hafs, and for two reasons I say that. Number one, because it goes, it can be reconciled with all his other statements on Hafs, because he's not
Okay.
so negative about Hafs in his other statements that some of his other students transmit. He has many students that transmit from him. You have Ibn al-Junayd, you have Ibn Muhriz, you have Ad-Duri, and others. He's not so negative about Hafs in those versions, in some of those versions. In addition to the fact that it also can be reconciled better with the statements of everyone else about Hafs, whether it's the statements of other muhaddithin, other hadith critics, and the statements of the Qurra. Because if
So
someone's a liar, go ahead.
are there any positive things that are said about Hafs?
Yeah, there's plenty of positive things said about Hafs. And I mean, for one, the fact he's considered an authority in qira'at would seem to be pretty positive. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, who's a famous hadith critic, he specifically mentioned that huwa thabtun fil huruf, right?
Okay.
Al-Dhahabi and all these other hadith scholars as well. When Abu Hatim al-Razi was asked about him, he didn't say he was unreliable in huruf. He just mentioned that he happened to prefer Shu'ba's recitation,
Mhm.
for example. So, I mean, it would not make sense for, in reality, considering the greater context of what hadith scholars are saying and the context of what Quranic scholars are saying, as well as the context of his own words, other words transmitted by his other students. It would not make sense to hold that he was actually referring to purposeful forgery or fabrication.
What I found very interesting was I looked up what Yahya bin Ma'in said about Hafs, and even though he has issues with Hafs, for his narrations, he does accept Hafs as a reciter. I found that very interesting, and even considers him to be preferable to Shu'bah in his recitation. I found that
Mhm.
quite interesting. Okay, here's another one. You mentioned two. You mentioned Ibn Khirash. You mentioned Yahya bin Ma'in. The third person, one who was very critical of Hafs, was our good friend Ishmael, who documented or collected. Let me see here. Five, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. He documented 8 examples. Oh wait, excuse me. 13 examples of what would I would refer to them as conflicts in of these variants, he
Mhm.
would accuse these narrators of contradicting one another. If we return to each of these variants, we find that Hafs is never an isolated reporter of these variants, and there's always someone who's agreeing with Hafs in his recitation. So that's another piece of evidence that Hafs never came up with anything. So even if we were to say that he was a liar, at the end of the day, he's acceptable in his recitation because I mean, there's always someone who's agreeing with him in the way he's reciting,
Indeed,
even
yeah,
with the
he's
existence of
corroborated in his
variation.
recitation. Yeah,
Very
he's
much.
he's
Yes, that's
corroborated by other people. Yeah. Mhm.
barakallah fik. That's the word I was looking for. Corroborated. Let me see. Is there anything else, guys? Folks who are watching this at home, if you have any questions, anything that you'd like us to look into or answer in regards to this specific issue of Hafs and his reliability, do ask now. Now's the best time to ask this. Any other thoughts on Hafs, Akhi?
How specifically? No. No. I mean, well, I mean, just to briefly, I mean, conclude on him, if you will, or summarize our thoughts. So his weakness or incompetence in hadith does not necessitate incompetence in qira'at. We also covered that the takdeeb of Yahya ibn Ma'in doesn't also necessitate purposeful forgery. And we also showed that it does not even necessarily make sense in the greater context to understand Yahya ibn Ma'in's takdeeb to mean purposeful forgery. And also we mentioned Ibn Hajar. We mentioned al-Dhahabi and al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi is a huge hafiz in hadith. He's a huge, very well-known hadith critic. He wrote Al-Kifaya, one of the most important books on hadith criticism, and he had no qualms in declaring him to be an authority and reliable in qira'at. So I think Hafs. I mean, I think we can conclude on that note for Hafs.
Inshallah. I also wanted to point out that one of the interesting praises that we find for Hafs is by Waki', who was a contemporary, who was a Kufan, who perhaps knows Hafs more than all those that criticized him, because most of those that criticized him did come a bit late. So he could be a better judge of character. Wallahu alam. Let me see if we have anything. It seems like we do not. Inshallah, we will carry on this series of responding to Ishmael, aka Don't Convert to Islam's um, videos, inshallah, in the near future. Most likely his couple of videos on the variant recitations and the contradictions, the supposed contradictions in the Quran. Any final words, Akhi?
Yes, actually, I wanted to briefly mention a few reasons why we think we have good reason to believe that the source of the qira'at or the variants were from the Prophet. Can I conclude on that?
Please, please.
So the first one we mentioned was the fact that in theory the Prophet told his companions on many separate occasions and to many different companions that there was variance. And some of them he even talked about the wisdom or the reason why these variants occur. So that's the first reason. That's the theory part of it. Second, we have documented accounts and stories from the life of the companions and during from the life of the companions during the life of the prophet, the era of prophethood, um, where one of them would hear another variant being recited, and they would be surprised. So they would both go to the prophet, and the prophet would say, "Yes, it has been revealed like this, and it has also been revealed like that." And the most famous story on this is the account of Umar with the other companion who was reading Surah Al-Furqan. And if we
Hisham bin
contemplate on the
Hakim bin
story,
Hizam.
yes, sir, that's who it is. And if we contemplate on the story, we can actually gain some insight on the nature of the variance and how even though he heard differences, there was variance. He recognized the surah he was reciting. He recognized that he was reciting from Surah Al-Furqan. So he thought just that he was making some mistakes. Then they went to the Prophet, and the Prophet corrected that. Corrected Omar's incorrect assumption. There's other stories that also happen to Ubay ibn Ka'b. You have, furthermore, you have examples of variants that are recorded in the anthologies of hadith, that go back to the time of the Prophet and the time of the companions, of specific individual variants that occurred. And then the last reason I'm going to conclude with is that these qira'at in itself, the combinations of variant readings in the Quran, these qira'at, have also been recorded with asanid back to the Prophet, and there's chains of transmission for them. And there's been, I mean, hundreds of books that detail these chains of transmission.
Barakallah fik, akhi. I don't know, I guess I just have one more to add, one more example to add. It's a very simple, basic idea, basic thought. Um, they often suggest, I'm talking about, Orientalists, enemies of Islam, people who just reject qira'at in general, they assume that these are mistakes by reciters and it doesn't go back to the Prophet, and they don't go back to the Prophet. And the simplest response to this is the existence of the variants of Malik Yawmiddin and Malik Yawmiddin. How is it possible that the Sahaba, would get that wrong? And how is it possible for the Qurra who have heard the Quran again and again and again throughout their lives to get something that simple wrong when it's something that children today will never get wrong? Subhanallah. It's just something that's easily observable today that one cannot fathom. Could not fathom that it could occur to the generations that cared mostly about the Quran. One comment here I just want to share, and this, there's so much truth in this. A brother says, to be honest, the only reason Christians bring this argument about Hafs and the other qira'at is because Muslims criticize the fact that there are multiple versions of the Bible. Yeah. Subhanallah. All right. Any last words, Akhi Abdullah?
No, I mean, but just to comment on what you said,
Yeah.
the reason why they have that assumption is because they're basing that on another assumption. Or the reason why they have that conclusion is that they're basing it on their assumption that the Quran was compiled and transmitted in a vacuum. Whereas the Quran was a living text. They used to recite it 5 times a day in their prayer in all those different rak'ahs. They used to recite it, voluntarily. And they used to compete with each other to memorize the Quran. So it was not compiled or transmitted in a vacuum. It was extremely well known and documented during the life and after the life of the Prophet. Even Ibn Qudama, this is something interesting, tidbit. Ibn Qudama, when he's talking about having a khatma of the Quran, how long you should take reading the Quran from start to finish, he mentioned the most amount of time someone should take is 40 days. And he says that this is for the extremely busy people.
SubhanAllah.
People were very connected with the Quran, and yeah, that's the way it was transmitted.
Allah barak fik, akhi. Allah barak fik. Great stuff. Inshallah, we'll carry on this series. You guys stay tuned. Inshallah, we're going to have another one soon about the variant recitations and the allegations of Ishmael against the various recitations. Anything else, akhi?
I'm good.
All right. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.